Everyone for coming today. I'm really excited that we've got Chris Jones, our guest speaker today. I'll let him introduce himself in a moment. Tomorrow is Time to Talk Day, so this kind of weaves in nicely with that, and this is all about the power of talking and some benefits of talking therapies. We ask everyone just to keep your cameras off. Please do use the chat facility if you have any questions that come up. There'll be about 15 minutes at the end for Chris to answer any questions that you have around the talk or anything around the talking therapies, anything that comes up for you. This will be recorded, so we will send that out afterwards. And then at the end, we've got a short feedback form that we'd really appreciate you guys filling in, so we'll pop that in the chat box as well. Lovely, and without further ado, Chris, over to you.
Thank you, Lucy. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm very grateful to Lucy and everyone at the EIC for giving me the opportunity to speak with you all. Just to briefly introduce myself, I'll keep it very short. My name is Chris Jones, and I'm a counsellor, and I'm also a person who has benefited from talking therapies. And that's what I'll be talking to you about today. I'm going to be discussing some of the benefits of talking therapies. I use the term talking therapies quite generally here to sort of refer to a variety of counselling and therapeutic approaches. So apologies, I may filter between talking about talking therapies, counselling and therapy in the talk. I am referring to the same thing. I put in the word some there as well, because due to this being a very large subject area that has been extensively researched, I unfortunately I won't have the time to cover all of the benefits research has shown talking therapies have to offer. However, I will provide some. I want to add that all the information that is provided today is substantiated by empirical evidence through research and clinical trials. The growing popularity of talking therapies means that we are often told that talking helps. It's quite common for someone to tell someone who is going through a hard time to go to counselling or therapy. So although we may often be told to go talk to someone, it isn't always clear how it helps or what the benefits of talking are. So in this talk, I hope to provide some of the answers to these questions. If you'd like to just change the slide, Lucy. So this is just a brief overview of some of the things I'll be talking about today. I'll briefly be touching on talking and talking therapy, looking at language and words. I will very briefly touch on the origins of talking therapy from Freud. I'm going to be touching on different types of talking therapy and reasons for talking, and then I'll be going into the sort of details of how this actually helps, looking at psychoeducation, how counselling can help us to adopt a new approach to living, how it can encourage us to experiment with different ways of living, how it can also help sort of move us towards a deeper understanding of some of our issues. And then I'll also touch upon some neuroscience and research that helps explain how talking helps before drawing some conclusions and opening up to a sort of discussion or any questions that people may have. If you'd like to change the slide, Lucy, thank you. I'm going to start with some quotes like everyone who's given a talk and wants to sound really wise and clever does. The limits of my language means the limits of my world, Ludwig Wittgenstein, and I identify myself in language, Jacques Lacan. So when discussing the benefits of talking therapies, I think it's helpful to consider the significance of talking itself. Now, talking has changed somewhat over the years. It's matured from the grunts our predecessor Neanderthals would have made into beautiful, complex languages that have contributed to the development of our societies, culture, and worldviews. Words are amazing. They've led to the formation of various ideas that have provided us with meaning and purpose. However, words also do have the power to bring us a lot of destruction and pain. Perhaps then it can be said that without words and language, we wouldn't have talking therapies. Well, at least I don't think we would anyway. It is hard to imagine two monkeys kind of being sat in a room giving each other counsel, but you never know. So talking therapy is essentially one person communicating through language something to another or others, and them communicating something back, usually something quite complex. Now, I'm neither a linguist, an anthropologist, or a cognitive behavioral scientist, so I'm not going to go and get bogged down in loads of different theories here about language, but I will touch on one that I think is relevant to what I'm talking about today. If you'd like to change the slide, Lucy. So relational frame theory explains how humans learn and derive meaning through the relationships between words rather than the words themselves having inherent meaning. Our minds build networks of associated meanings based on past experiences, culture, influences, and language use. And an example can be seen perhaps between the words sadness and weakness. Many people have unhelpfully learned to relate sadness to weakness, often due to cultural messages and upbringing. This is especially true from my experience in men. Sadness is usually often sort of associated with weakness. So if we, for example, looking through a relational frame theory lens, if we take word A being sadness and word B being weakness, the relation between the two being sadness is weakness. The effect of this relationship between these words is that when someone feels sad, they may judge themselves as weak. They may try to suppress, deny sadness, or avoid vulnerability, potentially leading to greater emotional distress. If you'd like to change the slide, Lucy, please. So step 2, by introducing new relational frames, we can break the automatic association between sadness and weakness and create more empowering meanings. So an alternative relation here would be sadness, perhaps seeing it as a natural human emotion. So being sad is to be human. Sadness, expressing sadness actually takes a lot of courage, so it can be seen as a sign of strength. Sadness often arises from caring deeply about something. So it can be a display of love also. Sadness also, processing sadness helps to build resilience over time. So in that sense, sadness can be seen as a point of resilience. If you'd like to change the slide, please, Lucy. So instead of interpreting sadness as weakness through a relational frame theory, perhaps a person might think that sadness, reframing their relationship with the word sadness can mean that I'm processing something important. Allowing myself to feel sadness actually makes me stronger. Sadness is a part of growth and healing, not a sign of failure, and I can be sad and still be strong at the same time. So by changing how sadness is related to other concepts, the emotional impact shifts from something to fear or suppress to something to embrace and learn from. This relationship with words is key, I think, in showing the ways in which talking therapies shift our relationship with words and change the ways we live our lives. So from looking briefly over the role of language and words, it can be said that words can hurt us, but they also provide an opportunity to heal. So from the sort of classic phrase that I'm sure all of you would have heard before, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. This actually denies the key role words play in our lives. So perhaps a more accurate framing is sticks and stones may break my bones, and words do have the power to heal me. So simply put, it's our relationship with and between the words that matters, and it's possible to change these. Counselling can help with this. If you'd like to change the slide, please, Lucy. I'm just going to close my curtain because the sun's coming in and it's blinding me a little bit. So I'm very briefly going to touch on there was originally quite a big section here that I was going to talk about the origins of talking therapies, because I felt like it's it's very interesting to touch on some of the work of Sigmund Freud and psychoanalysis. But I do feel that maybe with the time we have, maybe it's not necessarily so important to go into this in so much detail. But I did leave in another beard-stroking quote from Freud. Words have a magical power. They can bring either greatest happiness or deepest despair. So Freud there rehashing pretty much what I've already said, so I've beat Freud to that. But the origins of talking therapy, anyway, can be found in the formation of psychoanalysis by Freud. Freud's psychoanalysis was coined the talking cure and was the first talking therapy, a treatment method that operates through the exchange of words. So instead of, maybe I'll skip over this a little bit because I don't really feel like it's maybe much use to go into so much detail. But the origins of talking therapies, anyway, can be found with Freud, and he acknowledged the importance of language, speaking, and words. Previous to this, he worked in hypnosis, and it was through working with particular clients that he actually felt that talking was the important thing that led to insight and change. So instead, I will give a little brief overview here now of some of the talking therapies that have evolved from Freud's ideas. I will again sort of only briefly cover these because for time reasons, I feel like maybe it's not so useful to go into so much detail. If you'd just like to change the Freud, there's a Freudian slip right there. If you'd like to change the slide, please, Lucy. So there are hundreds of different types of talking therapies, some a lot more researched and, in my opinion, valid than others. I'm not going to debate which approaches work better than others. I believe, various different approaches can help people, dependent on person to person. And research suggests that, a lot of the approaches that I touch on here are very helpful. I'm an integrative practitioner, so I draw on a variety of different approaches, predominantly, from all of the ones that are listed on the PowerPoint there. Just to sort of very, briefly go over this again, I've got quite a lot of information here that I was going to read through, but I sort of read through it this morning and I thought maybe, it's a bit, you can access all this information online. If you do want to find some more details of the, how the different types of talking therapies work, I've got a link at the bottom there. You can find it on the BACP. But very briefly, CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, focuses on the interconnectedness of thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. It sort of views distress as not necessarily relating to the issue itself, but the person's interpretation and response to their experiences. Third wave CBT approaches, there's many of them: acceptance and commitment therapy, dialectical behavior therapy, compassion focused therapy. There's quite a few. This sort of broke away from more traditional sort of CBT views, and where CBT sort of saw the thought that mattered, more third wave sort of CBT approaches sort of look more at our relationship to and the way we think about such thoughts. So it sort of takes into account things such as acceptance, mindfulness, psychological flexibility. These become sort of some of the important things that third wave approaches look at. Psychodynamic therapy, deriving from Freud and psychoanalysis, but also having changed significantly since its origins. But this approach emphasizes the influence of unconscious processes, past experiences, and it sort of looks at uncovering hidden themes and patterns in our lives, often rooted in childhood, that shape our behavior and our relationships. Again, there's quite a lot of different psychodynamic sort of therapies. I won't necessarily go into detail on that. Humanistic therapy, these approaches, again, there are many, focus on individuals as a whole. It encourages people to think about their feelings and take responsibilities for their thoughts and actions. The emphasis is on self-development and achieving your highest potential rather than problematic behavior. A particular strand of humanistic therapy that I'm interested in and which I trained in is person-centered, which is based on the view that everyone has the capacity and desire for personal growth and change, given the right conditions. Rather than being seen as an expert and directing the therapy, the counsellor offers unconditional positive regard, empathy, congruence to help a person come to terms with negative feelings and to change and develop in their own way. Integrative talking therapy incorporates various different elements from various approaches. And this is sort of what I'll be drawing from today. There's also long-term, short-term therapies, as well as group therapies that can be very beneficial in their own ways. And like I said, this is a very brief overview, but if you are interested in looking in some more detail, there's an A to Z on the BACP website, which you can find to give you some more information on that. If you can just change the slide. So before sort of going into the main body of what I'm talking about today, just to briefly give an overview of some of the reasons why someone may access talking therapies. There's so many there you can see, and so much more than this as well. There are many things talking therapies can help with. If you can change the slide, please, Lucy. So yeah, how I've gone, waffled on a little bit about the different approaches, language, words, Freud. But how does this help? This is, what we're looking at today to get an understanding of, how talking actually helps. So to sort of help illustrate this, I'm going to give a vignette of a made-up client that I will refer to in order to sort of show examples, perhaps, of how counselling can help someone address a variety of difficulties through an approach that I work with that blends a number of different sort of ways of working, referred to as integrative. So Sam is a made-up client that I'm going to sort of refer to today. And yeah, you may recognize that image, Fireman Sam. I thought, being a fellow Welshman, I thought I would sort of draw reference to a character that I grew up with. And as you can see there, Fireman Sam is he's not very happy. So Sam is a 34-year-old man. He grew up in working class background in South Wales. His dad was a postman. His dad, I'm just going to make a joke there about Postman Pat, but I'm not going to do that. But and his mum didn't work. He has one sister who is 6 years younger. His dad, who he had a difficult relationship with, unfortunately died when Sam was 12 in a car crash while at work. Following the loss of his father, Sam often felt a big responsibility to help support his mum with finances and the raising of his younger sister. Sam was a smart child and was given a scholarship to study fire engineering science at the university in England. This was a hard decision for Sam to make, as he felt guilty leaving his mother and his younger sister behind. He also lacked confidence in his ability to complete university. He ended up going and doing quite well, actually, and he got offered a job in the fire service towards the end of his studies in Manchester, which he took. He would often try to travel back to Wales to see his family, but work commitments and pressures often made this quite difficult to sustain, leaving him to feel slightly distanced from his family back home, and often guilty, especially when another close family member became very ill and was unable to be there for his mum and his sister, as he had been when his dad passed. One morning while driving to work, Sam was overcome with a feeling of terror and experienced a sudden whoosh of sensation through his body. His chest tightened and his heart began to race. He didn't know what was happening to him and initially thought he was having a heart attack. He went to the hospital, where Sam underwent a number of different tests, which cancelled out any underlying health concerns, and he was told by the doctor that what he experienced was a panic attack. Sam then began fearing driving, worried that he may experience such panic again, making it difficult to work. As the weeks went on, Sam began to feel increasing symptoms of dread. These were especially intense in the morning. This led to him calling in sick for work, which added to shame and guilt about how he felt. And he felt understandably very low and would struggle to get out of bed and do much with his days. Sam was incredibly hard on himself during this period, blaming himself for what had happened and seeing himself as broken in some way. He was also embarrassed about his experiences and felt that he just wanted to hide away from everyone. Even his close friends, he wanted to hide away from. Through this period, he began having difficulties with his marriage, as he even withdrew from his partner. Eventually, out of fear of losing his wife and his job, he went to counselling, although he was skeptical of how talking would help with anything. If you could please change the slide, Lucy. So psychoeducation is the first point that I'd like to sort of make in the ways in which counselling, talking therapy can sort of help. Psychoeducation is a therapeutic intervention that provides information and support to help people understand and address difficulties with their mental health. A lot of the time, people may not even know what it is they're experiencing, like Sam, who thought he was having a heart attack. They may ask, what's happening to me? This is where psychoeducation, I believe, helps us to understand, what's going on, and is a key aspect of why counselling can be beneficial. An example of psychoeducation can be applied to Sam's experience of anxiety. Anxiety is often something that's quite misunderstood. The psychoeducation can sort of help us make sense of what's happening in our minds and bodies. When we experience anxiety, our threat response, designed to protect us from danger, can sometimes misfire, activating in situations where perhaps there may not actually be a very real threat. This is what happened to Sam, who, after experiencing overwhelming physical sensations like chest tightness, feared something was seriously wrong with him. However, medical checks about his health concerns actually cancelled any of that out, which reveals how actually what was going on was a response of a part of his brain called the amygdala, which you can sort of see as a sort of almond shaped part of our brain in the limbic system, which is our brain's ancient alarm system. It's been there, they often call sort of the reptilian brain. It's a really old part of our brain, and it sort of looks out for danger. And it, unfortunately for Sam, mistakenly interpreted his stress as a danger. If you'd like to please change the slide, Lucy. This alarm going off triggered his sympathetic nervous system, activating fight, flight, freeze, fawn response, flooding his body with adrenaline and cortisol. A lot of you probably already aware of the difference, parasympathetic nervous system, sympathetic nervous system. Sympathetic, ironically called sympathetic, there's nothing sympathetic about it. This is the sort of fight, flight, sort of anxious response, and this the parasympathetic, which is the sort of rest and digest. Sam's natural reaction was to start to avoid situations that triggered these sensations because, understandably, they're quite unpleasant, such as driving his fire truck. This provided some short-term relief from the experience, but unfortunately actually reinforced his anxiety in the long run. Through counselling, Sam learned how his brain's automatic fear response was not necessarily a sign of weakness, which he felt a lot of shame around, and it's not his fault, but actually just an evolutionary mechanism, one that can be understood and responded to differently. If you'd like to change slides, please, Luce. So using tools, and this is a tool I often use in my work, the stress bucket analogy. I'm sure maybe some of you may have already heard of this. It's sort of been talked about a lot, but it's quite a simple sort of way of conceptualizing some of our experiences of anxiety and stress. We all have a certain shape or size stress bucket. Things go in. If there's not necessarily things we can do to sort of relieve some of that stress, it can lead to overflowing. If we've got an overflowing stress bucket, this can sort of lead to unpleasant symptoms such as our stress or anxiety, sort of fight flight response sort of being activated. So it can be sort of this being a conceptualization of Sam's issues we could recognize that actually how accumulated stresses in Sam's life, work, financial pressures, personal challenges, had filled his bucket, making his nervous system perhaps more sensitive then to perceived threats. By acknowledging this and learning ways to release stress, this is personal to each person, sort of discovering what may work for you. But Sam was able to sort of shift his relationship with his anxiety, reducing some of the avoidance behaviors that perhaps, maintained his problems, and regain a bit of a sense of understanding and control over what was actually going on for him. This understanding didn't eliminate anxiety as such, nor was it really the goal, but rather it helped Sam to respond and relate to his experiences differently, seeing his difficulty simply as a misfiring threat response, as a consequence to a cumulative stress, from all of his experiences and things going on in the moment, as opposed to something very dangerous like a heart attack. If you'd like to change the slide, please, Lucy. So moving on from psychoeducation, which I think is, quite key in how it can be beneficial, counselling can also help us to adopt perhaps a new approach to our difficulties. So a few other quotes here, which I think relate to this. When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. This is a quote from Viktor Frankl, creator of an approach called logotherapy and a Holocaust survivor. So this is where, we start thinking about we can't change what happens to us, unfortunately, as much as sometimes we wish we could, but we can change how we relate to our difficulties. So this is a second point I'd like to make in relation to the benefits of talking therapies, is that it can help us to adopt actually a new approach to living. Acceptance, which I think is quite key in this. A few more wise quotes coming in here. A curious paradox is that when I accept myself just as I am, then I can change. Carl Rogers, creator of person-centered therapy. And then there's a quote from the Serenity Prayer, which I'm sure you probably all would have heard at some point in your life. I won't read through that. So I see acceptance as quite an important part of counselling and the way it can be beneficial. It is often quite intellectualized, I think, acceptance, and quite a vague concept. But when understood and experienced, can actually, I've seen and experienced, it can be very profoundly transformative. Counselling provides a rare space, perhaps free of judgment and preconditions, unlike other personal relationships we may have. And in this environment, clients can experience, maybe unconditional acceptance, which can help them get in touch with their own emotional experiences, perhaps ones they had denied or suppressed or resisted for so long. So there are a few points here I'd like to make on what acceptance can look like. If you could please change the slide, Lucy. So acceptance, one aspect of acceptance perhaps we can put down to being able to expect. To suffer is to be human. We will all suffer at some point in our lives. Holding such an approach can help us not to feel blindsided perhaps when painful situations occur. Rather than seeing such experiences as setbacks, we can see them as opportunities for growth. We can learn important lessons from our suffering. Surrender, this is often a term that's also used in relation to acceptance. We often naturally resist our painful experiences, almost getting into a sort of tug of war with them. Counselling can allow us an opportunity to experiment with a different approach of sort of trying to drop that resistance, drop that rope, and allow our experiences to unfold and see what happens. And usually it's actually something quite positive. In Sam's case, specific to him and perhaps to some others that may be experiencing things such as anxiety, acceptance also included mindfully labeling. We can practice, mindfulness is often a sort of practice that's incorporated into various therapeutic approaches, especially, as I've mentioned, third wave CBT approaches. And we can practice the skill of labeling our thoughts and feelings to avoid strong identifications with painful messages. For Sam, this involved noticing anxious thoughts and feelings, but returning his attention to whatever it was he was doing at the moment and what mattered, which helped Sam to sort of diffuse, I think, from some of these painful thoughts or experiences that he was going through. We can actively allow. This element involved Sam going one step further than surrendering when anxiety was present, but actively actually pursuing anxiety-provoking situations, while not completely overwhelming himself, but working on developing a willingness to experience the discomfort of anxiety. We can also sort of think about willfully tolerating uncertainty. Sam was encouraged to let go of safety behaviors and to do nothing when confronted with anxiety, when it felt despite it feeling quite risky, such as driving. Developing the capacity to tolerate uncertainty was key to Sam's recovery, and is key to anyone really navigating a world full of uncertainty. Anxiety sort of breeds from uncertainty, so being able to develop a tolerance of that is, can be very helpful. Providing a space for someone to get in touch with their pain through being more accepting of their experiences doesn't end there. This could feel quite disempowering and defeatist. Talking therapies also allow a person to get in touch with what they really want out of their lives and to connect with what truly matters to them. It can help encourage a person to take action and use their values to direct them down a new path. This shift in living in accordance to one's values can be a strong motivating factor, especially when confronted with difficulties life may present. If you could change the slide, please, Lucy. So, talking therapy not only fosters self-acceptance, but it can also help a client to explore their values and gain a sense of direction. For Sam, this was... So yeah, you know what, I'm going to go through this quite quickly because I'm conscious of time. So yeah, meanings and values, it can provide a sense of direction, not necessarily a final destination. It's an ongoing process, connecting to our values. Something we're constantly moving towards. It's not an end goal. It can be a very powerful motivating factor in when it comes to confronting some of our anxieties. And it can also help us get back on track, when we may, kind of fall back into old habits that, it's very natural and understandable, but, try and live in accordance to our values and what we find, is meaningful to us can sort of help us get back on track. And counselling can help us to, identify these things so we can sort of steer our lives in a direction that we want. So it informs our decision-making process. If you can please change the slides, Lucy. I'm going a bit fast now. I'm conscious of time, and there's still so much to get through. So I'm going to just sort of go quite quickly through this. Self-compassion, again, is I think a key part of adopting a new approach that counselling can help with. Changing how we relate to ourselves is key, really, in many talking therapies, especially for those like us, like Sam, who have quite strong internal critics, which can often be quite harsh and punitive. Inner critics become especially cruel during tough times, telling us things like, you're a failure, you're broken, or this talk is really boring. That's going on right now in my head. But these judgments can deepen our struggle, trapping us in a shame and embarrassment. But to counter this, counselling can help encourage us to acknowledge our pain, acknowledge it's human, and respond with kindness, neither suppressing or exaggerating it. Could you please change the slide, Liz? So you may all be familiar with this guy, Dalai Lama, very compassionate geezer. So this compassionate approach helps Sam to see his struggles as a natural response to challenges rather than reflections of his worth. He began treating himself as he would a friend in need. Sam practiced these principles by pausing when his inner critic perhaps emerged, naming his emotions and replacing self-judgment with kindness. Over time, this reduced his feelings of shame and helped him to reconnect with his self-worth. Although the ways we relate to ourselves, this will be discussed a little bit further in further detail later if I've got time. But it's useful to note here that many inner critics stem from internalized influences such as critical caregivers and societal pressures. These early experiences shape how we view ourselves. While Sam focused on building self-compassion in the present, understanding the roots of his criticism were identified as an area to explore later in counselling. Examining these origins can help challenge harmful narratives and foster a more nurturing inner dialogue. For Sam, developing self-compassion became a powerful tool for healing, though his inner critic still reappeared. He learned, just looking at the time, for Sam, developing self-compassion became powerful tool for healing. Although his inner critic still appeared, he learned to recognize it without letting it define him, creating a space for kinder, more balanced perspective. How are we doing for time, Luce? I'm conscious, thinking there's still quite a lot for me to go through.
Yeah, you're doing okay. It's about 6 minutes past 9. So say another 10 minutes, and then, or
Yeah. Okay. Well, what I'll do then, if you can just skip through the next slide.
Yeah.
So I was going to talk about experimentation, and this is where we're sort of, putting this new approach into action. It's a process of sort of adopting the new approach that I've mentioned there and sort of putting into practice, trying to play around with, kind of different ways of being, I suppose, and figuring, sort of testing out, what works for you. There's various tools that, was used in Sam's case to sort of address this. If you want to change the slide, Lucy, the avoidance hierarchy, this is, often used when it comes to working with things like panic, sort of rating, what situations may provoke anxiety and sort of working your way through them at a gradual pace. And this was something Sam was able to do. So yeah, I'm going to go a bit fast because I'm conscious of time. So the next slide, I was going to talk a bit about a deeper understanding, and this was going to relate to sort of unconscious processes. And like Carl Jung says, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. I was going to talk, if you'd like to skip a slide here, because I'm conscious of time, I was going to talk a little bit about how childhood can, sort of establish certain attachment styles, inform the way in which we sort of self-regulate, and how counselling can sort of make us aware of these processes and sort of facilitate some change. I was going to relate this to Sam's story. Apologies, I did go through this and I thought I had time to read through it all, but things have, unfortunately, maybe I'm reading a bit slower. So I was going to look at patterns of relating then as well, and look at sort of how our childhood sort of past experience can create blueprints for our lives. And, again, counselling can provide us some insight with this through the relationship. Defense mechanisms we all use, recognizing these, bringing those into conscious awareness, and symbolization. But I'll skip over to neuroscience. So thanks to modern technology, MRI brain scans, we have become more knowledgeable of how the brain works, and simultaneously have also been able to understand how talking therapies can help. Neuroplasticity. So contrary to popular belief, you can teach an old dog new tricks. Neuroscience has shown that your brain is not a fixed circuit board. Neuroplasticity is the brain's ability to form new neural pathways. This means that change is always possible. A simple way of describing this is to think of your thoughts like a path of a grassy field. You've probably heard this before. The more you sort of walk down certain routes, the more defined it becomes. But with effort, we can sort of carve new pathways and form new habits. An example of this was shown at the beginning of the talk in reference to relational frame theory. The way we narrate our experiences can be crucial to developing new habits, forming new pathways and new ways of relating to our experiences. Emotional literacy. Neuroscience has shown that when we are stressed, our brain literally shuts down the speech centers called the Broca's area. Counselling can help reconnect words with emotions, helping us to find new language to express our experiences. Could you please change the slide, Liz? Perception, I think, is quite an important point here. Neuroscience has helped us to understand. Not everything you perceive, actually, you need to believe. Neuroscience has shown how the lens we see the world through shapes our experiences. There's a neuroscientist, Carl Friston, who has a theory of perception that suggests our brains don't just passively receive data, they actively generate internal models or fantasies to make sense of the world. This process sort of means the brain is constantly predicting what it expects to perceive, and then adjusts its expectations based on incoming information. So in essence, perception isn't a direct reflection always of reality. It's a constructed experience shaped often by our internal beliefs. So our beliefs shape how we experience life. Past experiences such as bullying can make us assume that people may be untrusting, but which may not always actually be the case. Now, to give an example of this, I'm sure you've all heard of rose-tinted glasses, and apologies for this. When I added this in last night, I thought it was quite funny, but I don't know if other people will find it funny. So I'd like to introduce you to an idea of shit tinted glasses. If you'd like to change the slide, please, Lucy. So it's worth considering the idea that on bad days, we may also look through a lens that taints all our experiences with a negative tinge and blinds us from being able to see things perhaps that may be different, from a different perspective. Counselling can help us to identify the lens in which we're looking through life through, recognizing how this may be informing or misinforming our perception and therefore our experiences. This is important because our perceptions, informed by our beliefs, can also tend to become self-fulfilling prophecies. You know, if I believe I'm unlikable, I may perceive others as very critical. This may lead to me not socializing, reinforcing my beliefs and perceptions of others. Through experimentation, which I sort of briefly touched on it, I wasn't able to go through in much detail. This is where, you know, we can sort of test perceptions of reality, sort of reality testing, and try out not always acting in accordance to our perceptions, maybe trying new ways of living, you know, adopting that new approach that I touched on, sort of playing around with that and seeing what works for us, you know, putting these things into practice. This is where change really occurs, when we're sort of experimenting and applying these things in our lives. If you'd like to change the slide, Lucy. So I was going to touch here on a sort of part of our brain, the default mode network, brain sort of having an autopilot and fast and slow thinking, but I am conscious of time, so I unfortunately have to skip through that. So if you'd like to skip research, this is where, you know, I was going to add some details of research here, but, you know, with time, I'll just make a few points. You know, research has shown that counselling helps. I know it's probably, it would probably be useful for me to provide some examples of that, but, you know, thousands of studies have shown different ways in which talking therapies can benefit people with a variety of difficulties. Randomized control trials, RCTs, show a positive correlation that those who have gone through counselling have seen measurable improvements compared to control groups that haven't. However, that's not to say that everyone benefits from counselling alone. I think it's important to acknowledge in that, you know, counselling is not the fix for all mental health. We must acknowledge people's, you know, socioeconomic situations and see that counselling alone may not resolve someone's financial anxiety if they're living in poverty. So one must acknowledge, I think, and consider the need for additional support someone may need. This is where, you know, I could go on a rant about additional services outside of counselling that probably need funding to support mental health. And also the difficulty some people do have in accessing talking therapies, but I'll save you all the pain of that rant. So to conclude, if you'd like to draw on some points. So it can be seen that talking therapies can be beneficial in a variety of ways. It can help us learn about what it is that may be happening to us, such as, you know, psychoeducation. It can help us approach our problems and ourselves differently, adopting a different approach to our struggles. It offers a unique opportunity to make the implicit explicit, to bring unconscious processes into awareness, and to understand the internal theatre that shapes our lives. I didn't really get time to go through some of those examples relating to Sam's issue, which I apologize for time. I feel like that point perhaps, you know,
You can go here.
could do a bit more expansion. So it can also help individuals like Sam to strengthen their sense of self. So like I said at the beginning, there are many different therapies. This talk has looked at the benefits of counselling through a lens of an integrative approach, blending views from different schools of thought, some of the ones that I've highlighted. That's not to say that these are the only ways counselling can help. It's also not true that every counselling approach will look like the approach that I've laid out to you today. And just because it's different, it doesn't necessarily mean that it can't be beneficial. Yeah, I do stress that one considers maybe the type of therapy they are engaging with and to consider what may be more suited to their needs. While research is yet to sort of crown a single therapeutic approach as the most effective, studies consistently point to one key factor in successful therapy, which is a strong therapeutic alliance. If you'd like to change the slide, Lucy. This raises an important question. what kinds of relationships heal. This is some of the sort of traits perhaps to look out for: empathic, non-judgmental, open, self-aware, informed, ethical. These are some attributes to look out for, I think, when looking for a counsellor. At its core, therapy is not just about techniques, then it's about the connection. It is within the relationship itself where transformation can happen. One of the most powerful aspects of counselling is that it provides a tangible proof that change is possible. The very existence of talking therapies fosters some hope and belief, I think. Two forces that shouldn't be underestimated. I truly believe that everyone has the capacity for growth, healing, and transformation. However, I also recognise that access isn't always straightforward or affordable. While therapy can be incredibly valuable, change is also possible through self-directed learning. Personally, I've benefited greatly from therapy, but I've also experienced profound growth through my own efforts outside of therapy. So to finish with, finally, so rather than avoiding suffering, what counselling offers, it suggests that we need to embrace it in order to process it. If you'd like to change slide, Lucy. I've got a very cheesy ending to the talk, which is some lyrics from a Leonard Cohen song. Ring the bells that still can ring. Forget your perfect offering. There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. Counselling helps us perhaps to mourn the loss of the perfect non-suffering self fantasy, because it is a fantasy. We all suffer. And to move towards self-acceptance. But it also reminds us that even in pain, we can still find hope, meaning, and love, which are very, very powerful things to take with us moving forward. So thank you for listening. I'll finish there. Apologies, I've overrun a little bit, and I actually had to miss out quite significant chunks of the talk. I do hope that there's some information there that sort of shines some light of how counselling can be beneficial. And yeah, I'd like to open up for the time we have left just for any questions or any points or people's experiences perhaps of talking therapies. I'd be interested to hear them.
Thank you so much, Chris. Just before we go on to the Q&A, if my slides will change. So just a huge thank you to everyone for attending, and we rely solely on donations, so all big, small are always welcome. So we've got our QR code there which you can scan and to help us on our mission to support each and everyone in the industry. If you do want support yourself, you can access it through our helpline, which is open 9 till 5 Monday to Friday, or you can come through to the support email, and then we can look at a support plan and get some support in place for you. If, like today, therapy, this is aligned with you and you're like, this is something I really feel like I would like to engage in, come through to us and we can help with that. Chris, that was amazing. Thank you so much. That was, a wealth of knowledge, and I have taken so much from it. I'm just going to have a little look in the chat for some questions. Loads of amazing comments. People just saying a huge thank you. How do you know? I've got a question. How do you know which approach is best for you?
Yeah, that's a really good question. This is this is something that people from different schools of thought would probably debate for hours, really. This is in some ways this is sort of it's dependent on what school of thought people align with. I think this is where it's difficult, really, because it's dependent on, in my opinion, this is where I can just give my opinion, really. I think it's dependent on what it is that you're struggling with. And something I was going to touch on in the talk relating to sort of more approaches that work with sort of more psychodynamic sort of schools of thought when it comes to things like symbolization and things like this, which can be very powerful ideas to work with, but they can also, I think, with certain presentations be problematic, such as clients perhaps struggling with OCD. If we attach symbolic meaning to our thoughts, this can become quite challenging, because it can sort of keep us stuck in a bit of a rumination or cycle, or it can make it hard for us to disengage with thoughts which could be intrusive in nature, which maybe aren't actually representative of anything. They may not mean anything about you. And I think this is where, approaches can vary and disagree. Personally, I think there are particular ways of working that can be beneficial for particular presentations. But I guess like a solution to that is to find someone who works integratively, really, who can work with different approaches. That's the only real kind of, because I get there's hundreds out there, and it can be, oh, well, what's the right kind of counselling for my approach? I think working with a practitioner that probably can draw from different approaches, they can sort of tailor their approach to sort of work with the difficulties you're presenting with. So I would probably, as a sort of, I don't know if it really answers it directly, but I think maybe looking towards a more integrative practitioner who can draw from different modalities, maybe that is a sort of answer to that question, because it's like probably searching for a needle in a haystack, and different approaches will always argue their approach. Purist will be like, no, actually our approach is the best approach. So this is where you sort of can get drawn into debate, but maybe a simple solution is finding someone who works with different approaches. So in that way, then they can sort of adapt their approach to what works for you.
Yeah, I think as well, sometimes when searching for therapy, before I had therapy, I remember going on the internet and seeing a list of therapists and all these big words of being like, my gosh, I don't have a clue what humanistic means, Gestalt, all these things. So I think, especially from the talk today as well, Chris, has been really helpful breaking it down a bit more, because that's almost sometimes the hardest place to start, being like, well, what's going to be suited to me struggling with anxiety or bereavement? So I think that's been really, really helpful. There's been some amazing comments as well, Chris, people saying they, the session, they'd love it to do a full session again. So that's amazing to hear as well. Someone said, totally agree, that was so interesting. You're obviously very well read, and I could listen to you all day. If another session could be run, that would be great, which is really good. Somebody said, how important is it to gel with your counsellor, and what should you do if the connection isn't there?
Yeah, another really good question. I personally think that relationship between the client and the counsellor is one of the most important things in therapy. I've had various different therapists, some in which I didn't gel with, but there were, I still got something from the work. But I've also had therapists that I have gelled with, and I think that relationship is really, really important. And I think maybe if that connection isn't there, I think what I would suggest is exploring that, I think, with the therapist, rather than simply just sort of responding to, because you never know what could be going on. Maybe there's something there that can be explored, and maybe addressing that can sort of maybe lead to sort of the relationship actually kind of strengthening or connecting. So I would suggest sort of raising it really, and being, openly talking about that with the counsellor. It may be, this is where finding a counsellor can be really challenging. There are organisations now that are set up to sort of try and match clients with practitioners that they feel may be suited. So there are those resources out there. There's a name of one that I can't quite remember now what it was, but that's exactly what they were doing. But simply put, I would say that connection is really important. If you're not having that connection, I would say sort of address that and be free to sort of explore that with the therapist. And then it may be that you sort of can come to a conclusion where you're thinking, maybe it's worth maybe it is a case of finding someone that is more suited perhaps to what I'm looking for.
Yeah, and I think
conversation could lead. It could
yeah.
change something.
And it could change something in them to be like, okay, I've addressed something that I would normally really shy away of, and that feels transformative in itself. I think Matthew, you've got your hand up. Did you want to ask a question? Feel free to unmute yourself. We've got a couple of minutes left.
It was, Chris, very interesting. Love the talk. Stole a couple of photos on my phone with your presentation as well. So thank you for doing that. I just very quickly, because I know it was a couple of minutes ago. So I have used counselling in the past. 10 years ago, I was in a very, very dark place, and often talk about my journey now, and used quite thorough counselling for about 2 years. And one of the things I would encourage people to do, taking your point, Chris, two things. One, the rapport with the counsellor is extremely important. I went through 2 and then found that report with the 3rd. And especially I was lucky enough to be able to afford it. I also think you really have to look at it from the point of view of the value that you're getting as well, from the point of view. And it was really important to me to have the report with the individual. So that was one of the first things to do. But also, I think that I'm really interested in how the brain works, but I'm also thinking, especially with blokes, Phil's put it in the comments, is for men, talk. I think from the perspective of blokes, talk. I was in such a bad place that I had to talk, and it was and counselling for me was fantastic. So I would strongly recommend anybody, especially when they're at a particularly low ebb, is to at least attempt to investigate, look at it. But I would recommend you use the key message, and that is one of talking, not necessarily asking questions when you're at a particular stage in life to go, which one is right for me? Try and do your best, especially as a guy, because it is one of those things. So, and also just really just put it out there to say, look, you know, from EDF Energy, do some of the mental health stuff for them. If anybody's got any questions regarding counselling, firsthand, Chris is an expert, but I have a lot of experience, and I'm more than happy to open to questions. I've tried CBT, I've tried medication, do that as well, meditation. So there are very, very valuable things out there. Cannot begin to recommend it enough. So I will just put it out there. I think my email address is here. Anybody got any questions, more than happy to help. So that was it for me. And thanks very much for the presentation, Chris. Thought it was excellent. So thank you.
Thank you. Lovely. Amazing. I think that's just literally taken us to bang on past. Chris, thank you so much. You've been beyond incredible, and there's some amazing feedback that you can have a little read through. Everyone's just wanting more of the talk, so that's a huge positive. We've got the feedback form as well in the chat, so if you could all fill that in, that would be great. And yeah, tomorrow is time to talk day. So kind of like Matthew said, and Chris, the power of talking, just open up a conversation. If there's someone there that you think, maybe I just want to just check in with them, just drop them a message, get a coffee booked in, just check in on them. But yeah, I hope you all have a wonderful day.